How'd you feel about it, BB-8? Yeah, I felt about the same. Hey guys, welcome back to Critical Flick. I figured I would let the Rise of Skywalker discourse settle down a little bit before I did my review. So today we're going to talk about Rise of Skywalker. So I will say right off the bat, I did not absolutely love this movie, and I realized that I did not love this movie because of my own personal bias, my own personal issues with the plot lines of the story. So I'm trying to do a different kind of review this time. I feel like I need to split the actual quality and more objective elements of the film away from the more subjective plot lines and my own thoughts as a fan of Star Wars. And to say right off the bat, I think that the actual filmmaking aspects of the movie were really well done. I think that J.J. Abrams has a really good handle on the sci-fi genre, but particularly action sci-fi in general. I really loved The Force Awakens. It's one of my favorite Star Wars films, and this also captures some of those really good elements that make that movie great for me personally. I think some of the action set pieces, the lightsaber fights are really well done. The visual effects are really well done. And you have some really interesting uses of vehicles in the film, some really interesting creatures that are created in the movie that add a little extra element, a little more immersiveness, and just the fun of what Star Wars is in general. As far as the cinematography goes, I think that we had some really interesting looking planets that were created for this movie and some really well done sets. I thought that Daisy Ridley, who has always done a pretty good job in these films, was really, really good in this movie. Her struggle of dealing with what it meant to be the character that she is in this movie. Try not to spoil too much. I know we are a couple weeks out at this point, but that is a big twist. I'm trying to avoid spoilers for this review, at least till the second half when I talk about some of my own issues with the plot line in general. But I think she did a great job. Someone who is struggling with who she's meant to be, who she believes she is, and just her relationship with Kylo Ren and the other characters in the film. And speaking of Kylo Ren, I think Adam Driver brought everything to the table in this film. I think this was probably his best performance as Kylo, other than maybe a few scenes in the first film. And this really has been a great year for him. I think that he did the best with the script that he was given. He shows a lot of emotion in this movie. You see a lot of change in his arc and his transference from who he was in the first movie to who he is at this point. So basically, the performances were really good. I think everyone did a good job. Poe Dameron also added a little more element to his storyline. You get a little more interesting things with him. He stole the show for me a little bit while he was on screen. Also, like the amount of callbacks to the original trilogy. We get to return to the Death Stars we've seen. We have the return of Palpatine, obviously. And you have a lot of cool moments where you get to think back and you get those nostalgia-ful moments of the earlier films. But at the same time, it's a little cheap to me to do that. As a Star Wars fan, I enjoy it. Don't get me wrong. I think that it's something that a lot of people will enjoy. And that's when we touch on a little bit more of the subjective elements of the movie as far as storytelling that I didn't absolutely love. And if you did love it, that's fantastic. I'm not saying by any means that someone shouldn't love this movie or shouldn't enjoy the way the story played out. I just personally didn't love it. And I think one of my biggest issues comes with Rey and her general storyline. How we had in The Last Jedi her someone who is a nobody, someone who's not coming from a well-known family, or she's in a Skywalker or a Solo. She's her own character and her own story is playing out, and how anyone can be a hero, anyone who can rise up and bring balance to the Force, save the universe. It could be anyone. And I liked that element of her, and having that kind of get called back, and now she's a Palpatine, that feels totally out of left field. I was trying to, look up if maybe somewhere this is canon, if this makes sense anywhere. And I'm sure there's someone somewhere who can explain this to me. But for me, it just felt like they just were like, okay, we need to make her important. We need to make her part of some family. We can't do the Skywalker storyline anymore. She can't be a Solo anymore. She has to be her own made up thing, and it felt rushed. It felt like we had to make her important because the fans wanted her to be important. And I know a lot of people are nitpicking some of the smaller elements of the movie, as far as the ships sitting around, them working, or things happening a different way that maybe shouldn't really make any sense. The little dagger things kind of strange. I don't mind that. It's a fantasy movie. I'm not going to nitpick little elements like that. I think it's the overarching story of someone who's been following this saga since I was a little kid, and having it end here, it just didn't pay off excellent for me. I think that a lot of people that are a little younger than me and maybe don't have such a strong connection to the original films or even the prequels might have liked this movie a little bit more. I think that it kind of focuses more on the current elements of what Star Wars is. When it tries to call back, it feels a little goofy to me, feels a little wonky, and maybe if you aren't fully invested in these characters, you're able to play along with some of the story elements a little bit more. I just personally didn't love them. But that's not to say that I hated everything. There are some things that I really did like about the story in this film. It's particularly dealing with Lando and him coming back and his nostalgia-filled moments with Chewie and just flying the Millennium Falcon and being back in the fold. I loved it. I loved seeing him back on the screen. It really brought some heartfelt moments for me. And as a fan, I can't say that I hate fan service. There's a ton of fan service in this movie, and there's moments that I really liked being back in the Death Star, seeing the old Stormtrooper helmets. It brings that rush of nostalgia back. It's just at some point I just turned into a grumpy old Star Wars fan, I guess, and just some of the story I felt like I was personally not invested in and I didn't love. And that's not to say that it's really the movie's fault. It just didn't work for me. I also didn't love that they totally wrote out Rose as a character. I thought she added a little special element, like I said about Rey, being someone who comes from nothing, someone who was a slave and comes back and kind of is a main focal point in the rebellion, and her relationship with Finn was a little uneven, but added a little extra element to the story. I thought she was going to be important moving forward, and having her basically written out, delegated to having whatever was like a minute and a half or so of screen time, it just felt unfair, to be honest with you. I mean, I know I can't say it's unfair to the movie. It did what it wanted to do. But as someone who liked the character, having her totally written off because of, I feel, obviously some really toxic and negative backlash that was dealt with that character, it felt a little weird, felt like a little cowardly to take that route. I didn't absolutely hate Palpatine coming back. I didn't know how that was going to work. I was kind of confused when I initially heard that voice in the teaser trailer at Star Wars Celebration. I'm like, how's this going to work? How's he going to come back? I think they handled that fairly well. Having his relationship with Rey, though, was an element that I didn't really even need. I would have rather have him come back and try to corrupt Kylo to a more level like in the beginning of the film, but then having this weird dynamic of, she's his granddaughter somehow, and just that whole back and forth, this power struggle trying to make her bad when she's not bad, and I don't know. It just felt silly to me. It felt like something we've seen before, obviously, with Luke and Vader, but not so well done, not put together in such a way that pays off, because you have this relationship building with Luke and Vader throughout the movies. This is like 25% into this movie. Rey, you are now Palpatine's granddaughter. Deal with that whole element, and then we have probably a third of the movie of her dealing with it, and then the culmination of the end of the film. And the end of the film with her channeling all the Jedi. You have a lot of the voices. Like I said, there's a lot of callbacks to other films and other characters. I liked that moment. Kylo's story arc I also thought was pretty well done with what they were dealing with, having these two movies so different. Kylo's character is so different from The Force Awakens to The Last Jedi. Having that play out, I think, was pretty well written. I like that he kind of goes to being more like his father, and having Leia pass, and then having his life kind of shift into being back to who he was when he was younger, and his relationship with Rey. Obviously, there's some big Reylo fans. People really like that. People really push for that. I personally don't care. It's not something that I thought was a great storyline in general. But if you like that, I'm glad that the people that wanted that finally got that moment. So all in all, the story was really a mixed bag for me. More of a mixed bag than I think I ever remember any Star Wars film being. Obviously, I was a pretty young kid when the prequels came out, and I enjoyed them because I was a kid and I thought they were fun, and I thought some of the story elements paid off well leading into the original trilogy, understanding where Anakin comes from and kind of the overall background lore of what Star Wars is. And then having this new Force Awakens come out, thought it was great. Thought it was a great callback, a rehashing of a New Hope in a new way, setting up these new characters to have great adventures. The Last Jedi, thought took some really big risks, something that I really enjoyed about it when I initially saw it. Then I realized how confusing it ended up making the rest of the films. And then having this one trying to, in a way, get rid of The Last Jedi and a lot of that storylines, but that just doesn't work because it's just confusing. And I think as isolated films, I might enjoy all three of the Disney trilogy, but together it just doesn't work. It doesn't feel like it paid off, and that's the biggest problem I have with the movie, is that it just doesn't feel like a big payoff. It doesn't feel like a grand ending to the Skywalker Saga. It just feels like another movie that we could just keep going. It doesn't feel definitive. When I watch some other films that are ending trilogies or ending sagas, it's so epic and so powerful and just so much happening. You feel so much when you're watching it. There were only one or two moments where I was genuinely like, this is great, this is incredible. And a lot of them, I was just kind of scratching my head. So I know at this point, I'm basically rambling about this movie, and I just want to hear what you guys think about it. Did you really like it? What storylines did you really enjoy? Which ones did you really not like? I just want to hear. I just want to have a conversation about this movie. I feel like it's something that has a lot of discourse. The discourse on this one's a little more friendly than The Last Jedi, so I think that we should all just talk about what we love about Star Wars, what we didn't like, what we wanted to go in the future, and maybe write your own story. Write down in the comments below what you would have liked to happen, because at the end of the day, I feel like this movie was built off information like that. So maybe in our own way, this story can be blended and turned to whatever we want it to be. So yeah, a little disappointed in it. Not the greatest thing in the world, in my opinion. But if you liked it, great. If you hated it, fine. You know, it is what it is. It's Star Wars. We all love it. And we're going to continue to love it regardless of what happens. So thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe. And see you next time.